At the core, Klarna is a tech company that has revolutionized the way that e-commerce works, basically, with payments at its heart. So we've made it easier for brands and merchants to sell, and we've especially made it easier and better and smarter and more mobile optimized for consumers to pay. So at the core, we're a payments company. The popularity around our payment methods and around what Klarna offers has allowed us, almost forced us to expand into a broader product suite. So we have our heart in and our foundation in payments, but from that we've expanded to solve basically as many things as we can along the consumer shopping journey and along the merchant selling journey. So we do everything from inspiration and curation upstream to what we call post-purchase experience after someone has paid. So things as digital receipts or parcel tracking or really smart return management. So I mean, at the moment, it's fairly hard to describe exactly what we do. We are a tech company that is revolutionizing the way people buy things. So I think that's interesting. And for myself, I mean, I have a background, I have a marketing background. I continue to operate within marketing. I joined Klarna 4.5 years ago with the mission and task to transform us from a pure B2B player that was fairly traditional from a tech and fintech perspective. We were blue, we were mail, we were fairly back-end and tech-driven into something that is actually way more consumer-focused, where we combine B2B and B2C in a new and smart way, where we put brand and marketing at the same position, at least, as the products and services and the customer support that we have. So,
and it's interesting when you say sort of you're a payment provider with a lot of extra services. The first thing that pops to mind is a little bit old school, blue, dusty, and so on. And when you see the communication from Klarna, it's everything else but blue and sort of old school finance type of thing. What's the thinking behind that?
To me, I think I've given that a lot of thought, obviously, because we were very much a first mover within this space where we started to challenge the what I would call recipe for how to build a fintech. Again, blue, male, bureaucratic, men in suits, to something completely different, much more vibrant, much more in tune with culture and pop culture, much more understanding of a modern consumer and that consumer experience. But I mean, people usually refer to what we've done as something, almost crazy or completely different, or how could you dare do a thing like that, right? But the interesting thing is that if you look at almost all of the research, the industry that we're in, or used to be in, the banking and financial industry, is one of the most distrusted and almost hated industries in the world. Despite that, everyone still looks the same. So to me, it's not really a crazy strategy to look, act, feel, and behave differently from an industry that is distrusted and hated. So although we look fairly extravagant, I think there's a reasoning behind that, because just breaking free from an old industry and old habits is really at the heart of what we try to do, not only within marketing, but that spans across how we engage consumers, the products that we build, the services that we offer to merchants. So yeah, just being different is a strategy, but I don't think it's a crazy strategy if you want to be different from something that's broken.
Well, clearly it's working for you. I mean, with lots of success and lots of growth, like in hyper mode. I'd want to bring back to sort of the point on trust, right? Where you're saying the banks are generally distrusted, and obviously payments and finance services is something that requires a good level of trust from consumers, because you're trusting money into payments and so on, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you sort of deal with creating trust and building trust to such a brand like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, trust is really at the heart of what we do. It goes especially for financial companies, but I do think across across the entire spectrum of companies, trust is really core. I think what has that has not changed. It's probably never going to change. What has changed is how you build trust in modern times. I do think looking at a lot of our competitors, they do what they call trust campaigns or trust building, initiatives. And once you start doing that, I think you're on the wrong track. I think you need to understand how trust is built in modern times and with, a new generation of online shoppers. And really having products that deliver on the offering, I think, is very important. Understanding the tides of time, understanding, how to become part of everyday conversation, solving real problems and solving real issues for consumers and for merchants, that builds trust. Having these, trust building campaigns where you write these long brand manifestos that you buy a lot of media for, that is probably not the thing that builds trust. Having big marble offices that cost millions a year, as the old banks do, that probably doesn't build trust anymore. So even though we might not have cracked it yet, we're at least exploring a different perspective on how to build trust. And as I've said before, I mean, it is interesting. You at least have to take into account that people trust Kylie Jenner for financial advice more than they trust Deutsche Bank for financial advice. Like that's the absolute foundation that we stand on. And from that, I do think every brand and every marketeer has to do its own calculations for how to build trust in that environment.
And actually, sort of bringing up Kylie Jenner and sort of like, I mean, Klarna as a brand feels like it's associated with pop culture and trying to sort of like be fresh in a very non-finance way, right? So is sort of like, what's the thinking behind that? Sort of like,
yeah, no, what I mean, I don't think we're doing anything completely new. We're just doing something new in our industry. And the thing is, at the core of this is that I truly believe that Klarna has fantastic products and services to offer. They are, from almost every aspect of the game, superior to the old legacy services and products out there. The question is, how do I engage a online savvy, tech heavy audience to listen to that? As you know, as a marketeer, attention is the most scarce resource out there. So like, and with my marketing background, I know that only having a superior product doesn't cut it nowadays. So a lot of my work, a lot of my job as a marketeer is giving our products and services the attention with this young audience that the products and services deserve, basically. And that means understanding the platforms that they're on, understanding, what actually creates talk value and attention, and just utilizing those kind of marketing techniques is really important. And then I do think I wouldn't even call it pop culture. I think what we're doing is build a relevancy into the products and the services and the way we communicate that is very much lost with our competitors. We know that the old banks and old credit card companies have lost relevancy. So us just showing up in a new way, in a relevant way, connecting with people in a new way, I think makes a lot of sense.
yeah, absolutely. I remember I've heard you sometimes say that behavior builds brands or builds attitudes. Can you explain a little bit what the thinking behind that is? That how do you actually build the brand, and how does that relate to attitude and behavior?
Mm-hmm. No, so I mean, at the heart of what we do is this mantra of that behavior builds attitude, not the other way around. So what we try to do with a large proportion of our marketing and our communication efforts is really to induce trial. Because we believe that if people try the product, people are going to love the product. And if people love the product, they're going to love the brand. I think it's very hard and often also very costly to build it the other way around. In theory, having people love a brand and therefore try a product, I'm not sure that that is the way things work, right? I mean, maybe this isn't very inspirational or ambitious, but I do think like a big portion of my marketing is around sampling the product, making sure that people understand the proposition, not because I explain it or because I have a huge marketing campaign out or because Snoop does it, but really understanding and appreciating the product by using it. So that is why we continuously strive for interesting ways of having people actually engage with and use the product.
Absolutely. So in sort of like optimizing that experience for trial and making sure that people actually forms a positive attitudes after trialing it, right? How do you work with test and optimizations and CX and UX? It must be a big part of sort of like how you're thinking about making that trial successful.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is like when I talk to more legacy companies, they're very intrigued by this. When I talk to tech companies, they think this is just table stakes. I'm in the camp where I think that it is table stakes. Like we don't do anything without A/B testing or ABC testing. We, we always, portion out our sample testing in so many different ways. I mean, we have thousands of tests running at the same time continuously. So I think this is about two things, obviously, that we've built a model and a tech stack that allows us to do that, and that we have a culture where testing and improving is really at the heart of what we do. And that is also why we're probably worse with these old kind of marketing campaigns as TV campaigns that are very binary. Like you have to fix and figure out everything up front. And when you launch something, the only thing you can do with a TV campaign is cross your fingers and hope that it's well and it performs well, right? So what we've done when it comes to our digital efforts is obviously we've built a structure for testing, iterating, and improving, and do that on a daily basis, and a culture around that as well. We feel much more at home with that kind of thing. The feedback loop from consumers, the feedback loop is internally, the feedback loops from the data, that really powers our system. But again, talking to tech companies, this seems like, everyday work. Talking to legacy companies, they're amazed by our way of working.
Yeah, I think many would envy sort of having hundreds of tests running every day and so on. I mean, that must require something specific on how you actually organize your teams and how you work together. So you mentioned culture, but is there how you organize yourself as a business to allow for that and ensure that the experience is still great, but while you're testing and so on? What's the governance around that?
So the governance around that is basically that we have moved away from an organizational structure with departments. So we don't have a marketing department and a commercial department and a legal department, but we rather work in teams with clear problem spaces that solve for clear problem spaces. They have the responsibility and accountability and the resources to do everything needed in order to solve their problem space, right? So we're organized around those teams. They do all of the hard work and the testing, and to support that, we have a lot of teams that work with as center of excellence teams, basically. They improve the methodology, the ways of working, the playbooks, the frameworks. So that is the organizational model that we have. So we have cross-functional teams that work on solving real life consumer and merchant problems, and they're supported very much by the center of excellences.
Very cool. I mean, that's also very innovative to sort of do a completely different way of organizing yourself. Do you see any sort of disadvantage to that compared to sort of more traditional way of having different departments? And do you see a negative impact of that you're trying to sort of mitigate?
I mean, everything has trade-offs. I think if we would have an organizational model that is superior to others in every aspect of the game, everyone would choose this, right? So I don't think it is an organizational model that is catering very well to our needs. So the upsides of our model is that we can move at tremendous speed because we have 300 teams that work on their problem space. They have the resources, the talent, and the support needed to really move at an incredible speed, which is fantastic. What we're lacking in that is sometimes the orchestration in between. We try to solve that through center of excellences, but I mean, we still have a long way to go in order to reach perfection, right? There's a constant struggle between like what is done in center of excellences and globally, what is done in those teams, right? So, I mean, we're facing challenges as well. But what is interesting with this model is that we're really playing to our advantages. We love to move at speed and iterate really quickly. We love to scale things that work and close things down that don't work. So we're not binary in our choices. We move really fast there as well. We have employed a lot of people with entrepreneurial spirits. So we need to play to that advantage. We cannot become slow and bureaucratic and caught up in too many processes. So I mean, we've tried to build a model that plays to our advantages, but has obvious downsides as well.
Yeah, no, very interesting. I mean, people, right? Key component, of course, to that, right? How do you find the right people that fits in a culture like that, right? What do you look for in an interview process there, and what is it that you really sort of like value to sort of like navigate and survive in something that sounds like it could be very speedy, but also be a little bit hard maybe to sort of join as a newcomer coming into an organization? What does it take to be successful in Klarna?
I mean, we did a very solid job around this 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I think, where we really articulated this, because in a lot of companies, I think there's a sense of who you're after, but what we've done, we've really articulated this in what we call our leadership principles here, and everyone's a leader, so it goes for everyone we employ basically. So we have them written down in a very, articulated and smart way. But to summarize that, I do think really the entrepreneurial spirit is important. It sounds so cheesy when you talk about the courage to fail, but since we move so quickly, I think that is important here. And then thirdly, what has been important is that really not breaking boundaries just because breaking boundaries, but understanding that there are different ways of doing things. So creativity is really at the heart of a lot of things we do, not only within marketing. Obviously it goes for engineering, for legal, for so many things. Creativity is important to us.
So it sounds to me like what you're saying is that one of the secrets, a couple of this, let's say, secret sauces is here, going in a different way than the category, disrupting that from a communication perspective. Nothing that's, as you're saying, completely out of the ordinary from what you see elsewhere, but actually going in a different direction there, and then organizing for, I would say, speed over perfection, maybe, even though not to say your product is not great, but actually making sure that you get that test and learning as opposed to overthinking it up front, and seeing from reality on what is actually driving the value and what is picking up with the consumers and the merchants.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think there's another good saying that I use a lot, especially for the marketing side here at Klarna, and that is, I do think quantity leads to quality.
Yeah.
I think only focusing on quality can often end up with you getting stuck in endless meetings on strategy and alignment and thinking about things and thinking about insights. Whereas I like the experience I have is that just do things. Like just start doing things, and start doing not tens of things, but hundreds of things, and you will learn really, really quickly. So quantity really leads to quality. If you have a process for like high amount of output, quantity, and a process for learning from that output really quickly, which is discarding shit stuff and improving on things that actually work, I do think that's the recipe for quality. So I think what a lot of companies get wrong is they think that there's some kind of trade-off between quantity and quality. I actually think that the one leads to the other.
That's very interesting. I mean, so often we hear like quality over quantity, right? But you're actually seeing it the other way around. Just as we said before, that behavior actually drives the attitude as opposed to the attitude driving the behavior. Taking sort of like flipping it in a different way and seeing it in a different lens. Before we go to Q&A, I would like to sort of like, I mean, you obviously capture large amounts of data, and you just launched the Vibe loyalty program recently. What's your thinking about data in the loyalty program? How do you see that moving in the future, and what role does that play in Klarna's journey to further success and growth?
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously extremely important, but to us, it's really important from a different perspective, or at least that's my thinking and my hypothesis. I think 99% of the data out there today is used to do better banner advertising or better retargeting programs, right? I do think that what we're going to see more and more going forward is consumers really owning their data. Consumers, we see that obviously with the Apple update already, and the tracking technologies around that. But I do think the future is going to be companies who use the data to improve on the products or on the experience or on the personalization in a real way, not utilizing data only in order to improve advertising, but actually using the data to serve the consumers back. So I do think the consumers, they trust us with their data, and what we need to do is to use that data to refine it, to improve it, and then serve something back. And that is what we're seeing and what we're doing. So again, this sounds very flat and cheesy, but personalization is obviously extremely important going forward, especially within our space.
Yeah, I would, as working with that every day, of course, agree very much with that, and also working with you on it. Okay, and your loyalty program and the app and so on. How do you see that sort of play in, and where do you see that whole space moving going forward?
Yeah, I mean, that is obviously an interesting play for us. I do think the companies in general need to find an increasing amount of ways to capture both the attention but also the loyalty of people. There are, in all fairness, if you look at any company from a rational perspective, there are tons of equivalent options out there for the consumer. There are very, very few companies that are truly unique. So what we are setting out to do is really to build an unparalleled value into being a Klarna customer. The Vibe program, our loyalty program, is part of that, but I also do believe the kind of personalized content and the data is a huge part of that. The kind of content we can do together with our brands and merchants when it comes to really exclusive and tailored recommendations towards you, but again, overall, really building value into being a consumer, and the bar for that is only going up all the time, right? So the loyalty program is one part of building that value for our consumers.
Very interesting. And the app, I mean, there are so many apps out there today, right? I mean, how do you make an app relevant and single purpose apps versus what we are seeing maybe in Asia or in China, where apps sort of like suddenly can service every need you have within a space? How do you make sure that it actually becomes relevant and is something that drives the frequency for actually people using it?
Yeah, exactly. And I actually do think we take a lot of inspiration from China, as you mentioned, and the super apps over there. I think that is, to me, it's only a matter of time until we're starting to see that in the Western world as well, because I don't believe in a future where people will have an app for every use case or for every problem they want to solve. People are just not going to have 37 apps for their online shopping. One for inspiration, one for price drops, one for coupons, one for return management, one for, you get the drill, right? They're
Yeah.
going to increasingly more look for one app that can solve as many problems as possible. With that said, I still think you need some kind of moat. You need some kind of killer feature for the app, which I actually do believe that we have with our ways of paying and with our financial overview and our financial management tools. With that as a core, we can easily, or not easily, but we can expand into more services around that. But again, I think over a period of 3 to 5 years time, I think we're going to see the end of these one-trick ponies, and we're going to see more and more apps starting to cater to a bigger set of customer needs.
Yeah. And where do you actually sort of like, who do you actually compare as your competitors going forward? Where do you think the threats are coming from? Is that like from the big tech companies, or where is it? Or is it the old finance companies, or who is it sort of like?
I mean, it's
Where do you look
interesting.
to?
It's interesting. Like there are a lot of companies moving into this space. If we call like online shopping and everyday spending and retail banking this space, it's still fairly undefined. But I mean, Facebook, Instagram are moving into that from a social perspective. I know Instagram and TikTok also, for that extent, are spending tons on the actual checkout product and on the purchase, coming in from the inspiration side. The old banks are obviously coming in from the payment side into this space, trying to add more features to it. If you look at PayPal that acquired Honey, for example, I think that's an interesting space or an interesting example of a big company moving into this space through acquisition. So it would be hard for me to talk about one or two big competitors, but I do think, I mean, everyone in the end is going to be some kind of frenemy in this, a partner and a competitor at the same time. But I do think, I mean, we're obviously looking at PayPal and the big social platforms to see what's happening within that space.
Yeah, great. So before we go to question, and if you have questions, then post them to the chat, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. I want to go back to where we started, right? That Klarna started actually as a Swedish company and are now taking over the world and have launched recently in the US very successfully, and I think is one of the biggest payment providers in Germany and so on. Why is that coming from Sweden, right? Why is there anything there? And there are a lot of other innovative companies coming from Sweden, like Spotify and so on. Is there anything? Do you think there's anything there that's driving that, or is it just pure luck?
I'm not sure, actually, to be honest. I mean, we obviously have a fantastic startup culture here that has been nurtured for a couple of years, so we have that. When it comes to us specifically and Klarna specifically, I do think if we look at the US market, it's a mix of having, a fantastic product, but also
Yeah.
being a bit lucky with the product market fit and the timing of that, because the trend that we're seeing in the US and that is just accelerated during the pandemic now is the fact that people are sick and tired of credit cards and the amount of money that credit card companies are making. So we're seeing millennials abandoning credit cards en masse and moving into new ways of paying and buying things online. And I'm not sure if it's if it's skills or if it's luck, but that product and our way of thinking here in the Nordics is actually a fantastic replacement to credit cards and old financial models. But as always, I think it's a fair combination of skill and luck. But from a timing perspective, we're very, very well positioned to actually take on the fight with the credit cards.
Yeah. I mean, typically so hard from European companies to come and make it successfully across in the US, where you clearly, I mean, as you say, there may be some timings, but are getting good traction in the US market. Very impressive. So I want to open up for questions here, and the first question I want to take here is that somebody's asking here: has the pandemic forced modification to short, mid, long-term goals, and how you measure success based on changes in consumers' behavior?
That is a tough one. I mean, we as a company, but also we as an industry, I think we're in a good trajectory already before the pandemic. What the pandemic has, I'm not even sure how to phrase this, unfortunately or fortunately done, is to really accelerate behaviors that we were already seeing, both on the merchant side, the digitalization. Many of the merchants weren't really ready for a complete shift from offline to online. So we've played a big part in helping them with that, helping get that on track. And then on the consumer side, the behavior has shifted fairly significantly, obviously, to online shopping. So I don't think it has changed the company's goals and the trajectory we're on. We're still dead set on setting a new standard for how people shop online. What has played to our favor, I say that very humbly, is the fact that the pandemic has induced a digitalization and a new consumer behavior that we didn't really see before.
Yeah. Okay, great. Another question coming in here from the audience is, what is your favorite marketing campaign that you worked on?
That I have worked on?
Yeah.
Wow. I think our first campaign for the US, when we entered as a Swedish company, we didn't really have the budgets to go too big, but it had to be really smart in how we approached the market. And we teamed up with the fantastic drag queen community and the stars of RuPaul's Drag Race in the US. I think that was a fantastic campaign that was, socially driven, visually driven. It became a platform for our consumers and our merchants to really meet in a new way and demo our product. I think that was a fantastic campaign. And then we're launching a new campaign in about 2 weeks, which is obviously, as you know, as marketeers, you're always chasing the next best big thing. So I think that's an absolutely stunning campaign as well.
Yeah. And when was it that you launched that in the US? Because I know you recently had a Super Bowl ad, and you were sort of like, when you said you started out, you didn't have money to go big in the US. So something changed in the middle there, right? In between sort of that time scale.
I don't think it's always about the money either. It's about the timing, right? I think when we did the Super Bowl, the timing was really right. I think we were beyond a tipping point where US consumers, I think we just cracked the 10 million mark on US consumers. Our awareness was really at a level where we said, okay, now it's really time to accelerate that awareness. I'm not sure the Super Bowl is a good platform to introduce a completely unknown Swedish brand with a, to Americans, sometimes fairly hard proposition to understand. But I do think when we did the Super Bowl this year, I think the timing was really right. Like we were at that tipping point, and the Super Bowl helped us just to nudge us in the right direction. So it's just every campaign has filled its purpose for us. And although now in hindsight, I would probably have redone every single one of them, I still think we did we did our best in all of those situations.
Yeah, great. Here's a question, another one personally for you. How has your leadership style changed over the past few months? Have you been able to develop more personal relationships with your colleagues and partners?
No, unfortunately not, I would say, if I'm being honest. I would say the other way around. And I think that is the cost, the cost of expanding globally into new markets. Like everything is growing and expanding at an extreme pace here at Klarna, except for my time. I still only have 24 hours in the day. So unfortunately, I do believe that the personal relationships, they haven't strengthened in the last couple of months, rather the other way around.
And sort of just a question spinning off of that, sort of with your time being the same as it always been, but your organization growing, and you're saying you have hundreds of teams working. How do you actually make sure you can create an impact and sort of influence the teams when you don't have a traditional org structure to help with that? How do you need to? What is that? How is that influencing your leadership style and that?
I mean, I think we've built everything around our operating model to make it work, right? There are still flaws to it, as I said, but like we don't have traditional meetings, we don't do traditional presentations. We have extremely clear cadences for how the teams meet, how the teams update, how the teams work between what we call review sessions, how they keep leadership informed. That is one thing. The other thing is, I mean, we are an organization that strives for having autonomy in those teams. So rather than me being only a leader, I'm very much a supporter as well, making sure that the teams have what it takes, what they need in order to move at lightning speed and with high quality. So I think if I ever get stuck in a position where I'm a bottleneck to these teams, where they're waiting for my time or my approval or my thumbs up, I think I have failed.
That's very interesting. What brands do you look up to? What leaders in marketing do you admire? Is another question coming here.
I mean, I always have a weak spot for boring or people that can turn boring brands into something phenomenal. So I always mention Dyson, which I think is a fantastic example of, you know, turning a vacuum cleaner into something that excites people. I mean, when I go into the showroom of Dyson, I'm like, is this, is this the Porsche showroom? Is this the Tesla showroom, or is this Dyson, right? And those things always amaze me, right? They truly amaze me, being able to take a vacuum cleaner and create craving around that. I've never craved a vacuum cleaner, but I still have a Dyson, right? That's one thing. From a reinvention perspective, I've always admired Lego. I think they've done a fantastic job in reinventing themselves, their products, in connecting across generations, in actually being, the connector between generations. I think it's fantastic what they've done.
Yeah, I would agree. Also, as a Dane, of course, I'm grown up with Lego and other beautiful, let's say, Scandinavian success story. And actually, it's funny you're mentioning Dyson. I mean, my girlfriend thinks I'm crazy because I hate cleaning, but I actually love my Dyson vacuum cleaner and I actually love the feeling of using it. But it's amazing because it is just a vacuum cleaner, but they built some emotional values into the product, right?
Yeah, exactly. And get people interested in how an engine in a vacuum cleaner turns. I mean, that is not interesting.
No, it certainly isn't.
but they've made it interesting and made it into an experience. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. No, really good examples. Here, what traits do you think are the most important to have to be a successful leader? I think you sort of already addressed some of that at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I am a successful leader, so I'm not sure really I'm allowed to answer those questions. But I do think that empathy is really important. Understanding the people who report into you or the teams, what situations they're in. Probably not seeing yourself as a leader, but as a server to those teams and to those individuals is really, really important. And to me, especially in a company like this that moves at this pace, like keeping, being very mindful of the human side and the human interaction, although you move at lightning speed and sometimes, don't have time to think about being, having that human touch. I think that is extremely important. To keep that even in times of extreme growth.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I would very much agree. So I think I have time for one more question here. How do you stay relevant to your customers between purchases? For instance, MasterCard, Eurocard, offering insurances, etc. What are you doing there, sort of like to, I think, maintain the relationships and stay relevant and top of mind?
Yeah, exactly. I think that is actually a really, really good question in my opinion, because I do think that brand building and frequency of use are very tightly linked. This has always intrigued me with cars, for example, and I understand why they sell merch. Obviously, to get the price point down, because a key ring isn't as expensive as a car, but there's also something with that frequency of use. So that is something we're looking into. One thing is the Klarna card. The Klarna card is actually something that can be used very frequently versus an online payment. That's one thing, but also looking into other kind of verticals. So public transport, for example, is something that you pay or use 2, 3, 4 times a day. If we can team up with that, I do think that that is an extreme brand builder for us, rather than only working with, although it's fairly high frequency, but still, I mean, I have an ambition of making Klarna part of people's everyday life, and being that means that we need to get frequency up. So I think it's a really good question. So key to that is product development and other verticals.
Thank you, David. Thank you for spending time with me and the audience today. It was really interesting to hear more about the secret sauce behind Klarna's amazing success. And by that, I'll hand it back to Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David and Chandra. I think that was a whistle-stop tour through what is obviously an incredibly fasting business, and I love the fact we covered everything from, it's fairly hard to describe what we actually do, which was at the start of the session. I just love that you can feel the pace in the business from that one end through to kind of solving problems builds trust. That builds attitude, not the other way around. And I absolutely love that. I think that's a great sentiment to take forward today. And also we had a mention for RuPaul's Drag. So, I mean, it doesn't get much broader topics to cover than those. So thank you both for the session today. Really, really interesting start. Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to hand over to our next session and welcome our next speakers to the stage. We have Marion Saltzman joining us. Marion is the SVP Communications at Philips.